Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Hello everyone and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. Well, it's time to review the NFL in our Monday quarterback edition. So let's get right to it. It was not a good day for Midwestern teams yesterday, as just about everybody from the middle section of the country, save for one or two teams, lost yesterday and didn't really look very good in doing so. We had a couple teams on the periphery get a couple victories and a couple teams down south that ended up hanging on. So let's get right into it. We'll just start things off and go right down the list. So we go to the phone here. As I said, it was not a very good day overall. The Cowboys ended up losing to the Falcons 39-28. The big deal with this game was that the Cowboys ran out to a huge lead at halftime and then couldn't do anything after that. Brandon Weeden ended up, his stats overall really aren't all that bad. He ended up 22 of 26, 232 yards with an interception. Obviously, it's not good that he didn't throw any touchdowns, but only one interception. That's not too bad. John Randall ran for 87 yards and 3 touchdowns, but those were all in the first half. 100 receiving yards for Dunbar. But it was all Matt Ryan in the second half. 285, 2 touchdowns. Donnell Freeman ran for 141 yards, 3 touchdowns himself. Julio Jones ended up with 164 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. But as I said, it was all Atlanta in the second half. They scored 8 points in the third quarter, 14 points in the fourth quarter, 0 points in the second half for Dallas after scoring all their 28 points in the first half. But even then, their defense wasn't necessarily looking all that great because they allowed 17 points in the first half themselves, so it was 28-17 at the half. A pretty close game. Obviously you're up by 11. You still expect to be able to hold on to that in some sort of respect. But Dallas ends up falling in kind of embarrassing fashion. They had a chance to really put a stranglehold on the NFC East and failed to do so. And now they've let the Giants back in it. The Redskins are obviously still alive due to the fact that they beat the Rams last week, but they haven't looked all that great. But so it was just kind of a game where the Cowboys could have really put their stamp on that division, put the foot on the throat of everybody else, but instead everybody else is still alive now. Moving on, the Colts defeat the Titans 35-33 as Andrew Luck looked like he had turned the corner, and then all of a sudden he throws 2 interceptions, and then he gets the team back into the game, and they end up winning it because the defense stops a 2-point conversion at the very end. I really don't understand what's going on with Andrew Luck. His stats aren't terrible, but they're not great either. 18 of 30, 260, 2 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions, as I mentioned, and I know one of those went for a pick 6, if not both of them. So it's not looking good right there. Marcus Mariota for the Titans, who are a fellow Midwestern team, he was through for 367, 2 touchdowns, but 2 picks as well. Frank Gore finally turned it up in the running game for the Colts a little bit, 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not much running to speak of for the Titans, 12 carries for 49 yards for Andrews and a touchdown. It's just not really going very well for Tennessee. Tennessee was down 14-10 at the half. Indianapolis looked like they were doing a pretty good job. And then they ended up having to score 21 points in the fourth quarter to end up winning that game. And obviously the defense stepped up as well in that quarter with only allowing 6 points. But the overall story arc with the Indianapolis Colts right now is Andrew Luck, because it's just not the Andrew Luck that we've grown accustomed to seeing. And I understand that they've got offensive line problems, but we'd grown so accustomed to Andrew Luck being basically the next Peyton Manning, to where it's like, well, it doesn't matter if our offensive line is shaky or not. I'm going to be able to put the ball out there and do whatever I want offensively and basically win the games for us. And so far this year, he's been unable to do so, but obviously a big win for them nevertheless, going 1-2 instead of 0-3. So they've put their stamp on that division now. I still think that they're going to win it, but they've got to find a way to turn things around, because the way that Andrew Luck was playing, if you keep throwing this amount of interceptions, it's not a good thing. The only thing that Andrew Luck has got going for him right now is the fact that he's still throwing so many touchdowns, because I saw a stat yesterday that he has actually thrown more interceptions since he has been drafted, I believe. Maybe it's only over the last year or so. But anyway, he's thrown more interceptions over that time frame than Jay Cutler has. He's thrown 29. Jay Cutler's thrown 26. That's not a name you want to be associated with when it comes to interceptions, because Jay Cutler has become Mr. Interception. Running down some more scores, the Browns lose 27-20. Their quarterback situation really is a mess. Josh McCown, he ended up throwing for 341 yards and 2 touchdowns, but an interception. But the Browns just don't have any kind of offensive rhythm. Their only leading rusher had 36 yards, which seems to be a theme among a lot of Midwestern teams, but really over the NFL around. The leading rushers for these teams aren't getting over 100 yards. They're either getting well over 100 yards or not even close. It's really a big disparity and kind of interesting to see. Cleveland, again, just couldn't do anything in the first quarter. 3 points in the second quarter, 7 in the third, 10 in the fourth. That's just not going to cut it. You got to be able to do something better. I don't know if Johnny Manziel is the answer. Probably not, because statistically McCown didn't do a bad job, but the offense for the Browns just really is kind of non-existent. Let's see what else went on. The Panthers beat the Saints. The Saints again. This time they were without Drew Brees, but the Saints are just not looking good at all. They're 0-3. The offense is not clicking. They could only manage 22 points, and that was kind of spread over all 3 quarters. 10 points at halftime, 12 points after that. McCown ended up throwing for 310 yards, but an interception in there. Ingram had 50 yards and a touchdown. Again, not even really approaching 100 yards rushing as your leading rusher. That's just not going to cut it. Some of the other games, the Texans beat the Buccaneers 19-9. The Texans obviously ended up pulling out the victory. They're still not looking very solid. They're playing a very shaky Tampa Bay team. They are 1-2. Both teams are 1-2 now. Houston only had 7 points in all of the first half. Ended up scoring 12 points in the second half to win the game. But again, relying on that defense, and eventually J.J. Watt is just not going to be able to do it. You have to do it offensively. And again, the quarterback numbers for Ryan Mallett not looking all that bad. 228 yards and a touchdown, but also a pick. It's just, I don't know. These teams just are not really coming through at all. The Vikings ended up coming through, though. They beat the Chargers 31-14. Teddy Bridgewater only threw for 121 yards with an interception. Adrian Peterson finally went off, as he did last week as well. 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Minnesota really was in control from the beginning. They were up 10-7 at the half. 14 points in the third quarter, and then 7 in the fourth quarter pretty much closed it out, as well as a shutout of San Diego in the first and third quarters. So the defense, a big reason why Minnesota won there, but they also managed to put points on the board, and that's what you have to do. When you have the ball, you need to put points, especially if your defense is going to play well, and that's something we'll get to with the St. Louis Rams here coming up. The Seahawks just lambasted the Bears 26-0. This one wasn't even a game. The Bears had to go 10 straight possessions where they punted. I mean, that's embarrassing, quite frankly. Jimmy Clausen only threw for 63 yards. Matt Forte ran for 74 yards. Obviously, the Bears did not score at all. I mean, Seattle's a very good team. The St. Louis Rams made them look not as much so, and they have offensive line problems, but they're still an excellent team. And this Bears team is just an embarrassment, quite frankly, right now. The Broncos on Sunday Night Football played the Lions. The Broncos ended up winning. They were the periphery team I'm talking about, a little bit out west, but we're still going to kind of mix them in there because they're kind of in between the mountains. But Peyton Manning's still not looking quite like Peyton Manning. His stats were okay, 34 of 42, 324, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Matthew Stafford, 282 in terms of yards, a touchdown and 2 interceptions. He's got to cut that out. He wants to be the next Brett Favre. Well, you're doing a good job in terms of the interceptions, but other than that, you can't keep throwing that many picks and expect your team to be anything. And he's got to be the leader of that team now. They're not as stout defensively, so they have to find a way to win games offensively, and right now they're just not doing it. The game, obviously, that was of the most interest to me and quite a few of the viewers here, the St. Louis Rams, I don't know. 12-6, they lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And when you think about it in overall terms, in terms of what was expected before the season, yes, you would probably chalk up the Steelers game to a loss beforehand. But it's just the way that these things happen that's so disappointing. Nick Foles, for whatever reason, over the last 2 games, looks completely inept when he looked fantastic. Well, I shouldn't say fantastic, but he looked really good against the Seattle Seahawks, and that's an excellent defense. But he knew what he was doing. Perhaps it's because he had 2 weeks to prepare, or even more, since it was game 1 of the season. But he looked like he knew where he wanted to go with the football, and all of a sudden now that's disappeared. His stats aren't very good, 197 yards and an interception. And then the throw there at the end of the game, quite frankly, I blame him for. The referees, I don't think that call was correct. I couldn't quite see it hit the ground, and to me, if you don't see definitive proof, that ball is definitely 100% on the ground. You shouldn't be able to call that. But I mean, they wouldn't necessarily have driven down to score anyway. But the bottom line is Nick Foles threw it way high. I mean, it was a hell of a grab from Kenny Britt. The fact that he even got a hand to that one, let alone caught it, is amazing. And then all of a sudden you have that debacle that happens once he hits the ground. But it shouldn't have been hit that high. You hit him in the numbers. And he was doing that all day. Nick Foles is quickly becoming another in a long line of St. Louis Rams quarterbacks that shows you flashes, throws you brief little glimpses, but for the overall part just didn't get to cut it. The St. Louis defense really did a hell of a job. I mean, there were plenty of times to where it was like, what's going on here? This is supposed to be one of the best defenses in the league, and they weren't showing it because Pittsburgh would drive. But then once it came down to brass taxes, the defense would finally find a way to stand up and be accounted for and make a stop. And that's ultimately what you have to expect from this team. The secondary on this team is not great. It's good enough. If the front 7 doesn't get pressured, then all of a sudden you're leaving yourself open at the back. I think that's what happened against Pittsburgh a lot. They finally started to get to Roethlisberger, actually took him out of the game. It looks like he's going to be out at least 4 weeks, if not longer. Knee damage is always kind of iffy. But the St. Louis Rams defense showed up. I mean, it did enough. You hold a Pittsburgh Steelers offense that put up 40-plus points the week before to only 12 points. You did your job, but the offense only manages 2 field goals. That's not good enough. Chris Givens is your leading rusher with 24 yards. And the rushing game has disappeared. I mean, Todd Gurley came in and did absolutely nothing. He had a couple good runs where you could tell it's like once he really settles into the offense and gets used to the schemes and everything, I think he'll be a solid running back. But he did absolutely nothing in that game. Trey Mason did absolutely nothing. I think he had 16 yards. He had a couple good runs, but again, that's just not good enough. This is a team that I honestly believe has the talent, has the capabilities to win the NFC West. It's going to be extremely difficult because Arizona looks like they're unbeatable right now, and St. Louis has to go out and play Arizona next week. But it's a disappointing week. They had a chance to knock off a huge, big-name opponent, and the offense just is absolutely nowhere to be seen. Extremely disappointing from the St. Louis Rams aspect. That is the View from the Midwest. What are your views on the topics? What happened in any of the games that you cared about? Comment, rate, and subscribe. Go ahead and get a conversation going. I love talking about this stuff for good or for bad. As long as we keep it all respectful. Let's not start just boiling down into the cuss words on the first comments. Outside of that, as I said, give us a thumbs up on Facebook or YouTube. And until the next time, I'll see you then.